Recording in progress.
Welcome to Dateline Hamden on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, blowing your ears out here on New Haven's home for community radio.
I can hear him.
You can hear, all right.
Yeah. How do we turn this down, Paul?
We have
Can
to
turn it down.
Sure, you can turn it down.
How do you turn it down?
There should be oh yeah, I should have it right here. How's that?
Much better.
All right, we're talking to two familiar guests on our studio to talk about the state legislative session that just ended and the campaigns that are coming up. Pivot point in Connecticut politics. We have Hamden State Senator Jorge Cabrera and Hamden State Rep Joshua Elliott, who just completed a bid for the state Secretary of State nomination. They're both running for re-election this year and just finished an 11-week session at the Capitol. They call it a short session. Welcome, gentlemen, and thanks so much for coming in
Yeah.
to WNHH.
Thanks for having us.
So right before the session began, Senator Cabrera, you were in here, and you said, short session means they don't do the whole full budget. They tweak the budget. Not as many bills get raised because I guess they want to have more time to campaign, right? Because the number of year, that's why they do that?
A lot of bills got raised.
You still get a lot.
was
You
wrong.
said you were going to try to make the most of the session.
I was, yeah.
And the thing that was at the top of your list, you told me, was mental health.
Yes.
People are just kind of freaking out with the pandemic. There were problems
Yeah.
that already existed with access to mental health. Life's been tough for young people, but not just young people. Then the pandemic came with the isolation and the fears and crazy stuff going on in the world. So how'd it go? You were able to pass a couple measures for mental health in this
Yeah,
session.
very
And if you get
pleased.
close to the mic, if you don't mind.
Very pleased. I'm sure Representative Elliott would share the same good news. We passed a major historic mental health bill that addresses and meets the moment of all the things we've been hearing about. Major investment for our kids, especially at the school level, getting more practitioners in the zone, so to speak, helping with payments, telehealth. We did an amazing job, and it was bipartisan, and it was a fantastic.
So that's something
legislation.
Republicans and Democrats were not arguing about.
No, it was something we
Not
all
even
came
about
together on.
specifics?
No. We came together. We realized that the landscape in the state of Connecticut, because of the pandemic, the depression, the anxiety that we were seeing, the unfortunately young people just struggling in school. We've heard it so many times from social workers and counselors and teachers, and we met the moment. We made a major investment in mental health in our state. We have, for the first time, bolstered and strengthened our mental health infrastructure. We're going to get more practitioners in the field. We're going to allow telehealth to be permanent and across state lines. We are funding our school-based health clinics to make sure that the kids have the resources and the staff available to them when they have a crisis. So
Let's go one by one on some of that.
Yeah.
So you made $10 million in need-based grants for school-based health centers.
Correct.
So you're going to be $10 million more dollars for in-school mental health, which isn't a ton of money. I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's how many school systems you see that helping?
I don't know. I could find that out for you.
No, I'm just curious. I mean, but it is some money.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. Well, a lot of our schools already have facilities, but this is going to bolster that.
Oh, okay, so that's for the facilities. Then you have a separate grant program for boards of ed to hire and retain more social workers, psychologists, nurses, and counselors in schools.
Right.
So in some parts of the country, they are arguing about social emotional, as they call it. That's become a word for not just teaching kids how to read, but help them deal with their feelings and each other so they can learn. That got grabbed by the right nationally, some kind of plot to inject, I don't know, something or other, and they're like going after that. But I guess in Connecticut, we were able to deal with that.
We were, yeah. I think we wanted to address the issues that we were seeing and hearing from our teachers and at the school-based level. and that was that kids were coming in record number to the counselor's office and to the therapist's office in the school, and they want to make sure they had the staff available to help them through their crisis.
And then student athletes, this is a separate mental health plan. Tell me about that, Senator Cabrera.
I'm not too familiar with that one. I know
That's
we
in
just-
there. Okay.
Yeah.
And then it's not, and also youth service bureaus, and then there's stuff that's not just for kids, right? You got to have a mobile crisis center.
Yes.
Tell me about the
crisis
mobile. They're going to more 24 hours a day,
Yep.
7 days a week, everywhere in Connecticut. So
Yeah.
what are these?
So one of the things that and I think we spoke about this when I came in last time, was the continuum of care. Where a child goes to an emergency room, and oftentimes the communication is in there with the provider afterwards. And so what we wanted to do is have 24-hour mobile crisis unit, so that at any time when a child has a crisis, there's someone available there to help them go through that.
So that is for children.
Yeah.
So what about it being mobile? What's that about? That goes to where the kid is or to the emergency room?
There's a crisis at any 24 hours a day. It doesn't matter what time it is. You're able to get there and make sure that the child has the care and help that they need.
Then the Department of Health of the state will manage a program recruiting and retaining healthcare workers, especially behavioral health. Is that for, again, targeted kid, or is that general population?
General population. One of the things that I heard especially from lots of practitioners, was that their caseloads were huge. Their wait lists were huge, and we knew right away we needed to put more people in the zone, so to speak. We needed to find a way to recruit more social workers to get in the field, more therapists to get in the field.
And then part of the issue is insurance, right? Like what gets covered or how much you get reimbursed for the care. Like a lot of therapists won't take insurance because they feel they don't get reimbursed enough. Was that all dealt with, or is that on the plate for next time?
I don't think that was addressed. I don't remember right now, but that's something I've heard.
So we had
as well.
this immediate crisis of young people. Telemedicine is for all people, right? So
Yes.
you say you made that permanently. That
Yes.
what did you make permanently? That insurance companies would reimburse for that?
So we had a weird thing in Connecticut where if you were a practitioner but living in another state, and the client or the child or the person was in Connecticut, couldn't cross state lines. So we eliminated that. So now, if you have a therapist who's living in Rhode Island, for example, and you can actually do telehealth across state lines now.
Is it also have to deal with because during the pandemic you didn't have to see your therapist in person, but now is it back to do you need to, or no? Is it still reimbursable?
I think it's reimbursable. I mean, it's your option now as things get better. But
Because we wondered whether that was one thing that might change with the pandemic permanently. You know how we said like we have that would we permanently have telehealth?
telehealth is permanent in the state of Connecticut now. So that's an option. If people are using it, they can continue to use it. If they want to go in person, they're more than welcome to go in person.
So do you feel like you kind of saved lives? Like you went up there for 11 weeks, you saved lives?
We do. I mean, the work we do is so important. I say this to lots of people. Politics is a really important thing in our lives because it impacts lives. And we saw this crisis. I mean, I heard horror stories of young children committing suicide and being depressed and not having the resources they needed. And I think what we did was we met the moment. We recognized we had a crisis on our hands and we need to do something, especially for our young children in the schools.
And then also, besides this really sad stories about suicide, it's just people are bouncing off the walls at the school. You saw that in Hamden,
Yep.
Josh, right? Like, and in New Haven, where they're like attacking teachers, attacking each other, and more so than before. Any thoughts on what the trajectory of that is, and what role a legislator plays, if anything?
I mean, as long as we're making these investments, I think that there is an interesting intersection here, only because through this pandemic, people that were on the left were really focused on the schooling side, and I think people that were more conservative were really focused on the mental health side. And we're at this point now where we recognize that we were both right, everyone was right, and we're finally putting resources into ensuring that the kids have the support that they need, because there is an aspect of having been out of school and not having that level of socialization through really important formative years. And so we're hopeful. We're hopeful that this will help. I know that a number of legislators that worked on this bill have children that are of school age and were personally impacted, and they were the ones that were leading the fight here. And so it's not just people that are hearing stories, it's people that are personally impacted that are doing this work.
I'm really interested in what you just said, Josh Elliott. On the right, you focused on the schooling side. The left. On the right, the mental health side. What does that mean? What were they focusing on that was different?
Well, I think that people who are a little bit more cautious about the side effects of wearing masks, and I want to be very, very clear. I am one of the leaders in terms of public health and safety and making sure that everybody is vaccinated. But we do know that there were repercussions of the children who
not
were
being
not
in school and bouncing off the walls.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. And so while I think people that are a little bit more liberal-minded, we're thinking we need to make sure that that we're ensuring that there's no spread of disease, which is absolutely right. And people that were more conservative were saying, well, what's the outcome when we aren't having kids in school? When
that dovetails with something I experienced, because I like you, I kind of come out of a Bernie Sanders type perspective on things, that I think the pandemic was kind of humbling.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we were all right about some stuff. We were all wrong about some stuff.
That's right.
And some stuff you just couldn't freaking predict.
Yeah.
So as Josh points out, I think a lot of people on the left who wanted to be more cautious felt the right had a good point about the dangers of not being in school for so long and not trying to make that work. And people on the left feel the right kind of didn't take the disease seriously enough at the beginning for the spread. But also, like, every day we learned something new about the disease we didn't know. For instance, we just learned that Omicron, you get reinfected with an Omicron subvariant right after you got it, which wasn't true about earlier strains of this coronavirus, so that we keep having to update. And that must be interesting as a legislator, because you have to make decisions that will last for the year. And this virus, we learn something new about it every week.
That's why one thing that we really try to do is, when possible, offload some of that responsibility onto our agencies. Like, we have the Department of Public Health, and as long as we can provide them a framework within what we want them to be using, they are a lot more flexible to be addressing new science. Because the fact is, like you said, we are a part-time legislature, and that was a big... had played a big role in terms of what we were doing in terms of school closure, in terms of executive orders, because we knew we wouldn't be able to come back very quickly and make these quick decisions. So
maybe that's the role of an executive.
That's exactly
right. You guys
right.
set policy, you ask the questions,
That's
you deal
exactly
with some of the big issues. Did you feel, George, you feel comfortable that the Lamont administration, Department of Health, they were on top of it, they're taking it seriously to roll with the day-to-day revelations and trends to make good decisions?
Yeah, I think so. The governor, I think, did an excellent job under very difficult circumstances. You know, he was communicating effectively every day. Don't forget, we had some of the lowest, highest vaccination rates in the country. I think, if not the, we were right on there. So they did a great job in rolling that out.
It's interesting to me to watch now. So we were in a state where we bleed more in masks and vaccines. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that even very pro-masking decision makers like Hamden, New Haven's mayors, like the governor, I think there's kind of a sense that even if you think it's time to go back to them, mandates aren't going to work anymore. People just aren't going to do it. They've had enough. Are you kind of...
I mean, even when we were talking about masks in the chamber, the Speaker of the House said, I just don't think we can continue making this argument, that we can't keep on threatening to close down debate if people aren't wearing masks. I think we're just at that point.
Because there's still the high spread, but it's not as virulent as it was.
Right.
There are vaccines. There are people who can wear masks to protect themselves. So I think there are good reasons to wear masks, but I think we might be past the point where mandates are going to happen.
Well, if you think of changing perspective, I mean, there was a time when if we were at 3% positivity rate, people were just going crazy. And we've had times where it's 12. Up to 25%.
Yeah, now it's 12.
And now we're at like 13 to 15. I think it's even higher than that. And people are like, well, this is the next wave. Here we go.
But lower fatality because the vaccines
much lower
working.
Fatality. And I keep coming back to this idea of we kept shifting what our perspective was, because at the very beginning it was let's just make sure that hospitals aren't overwhelmed, and we're so far from that question now, and we have so many ways to alleviate the symptoms.
We have drugs. But one thing we thought then was, let's make sure they're not overwhelmed, but eventually everyone's going to get it, but then you're going to get it, and we might have herd immunity. Now there's no hope of herd immunity. No. This virus doesn't act like the flu or other...
Right. That's not to say that vaccines aren't going to get better over time as well, though.
That's true.
So we'll see. We're constantly operating with the best science that we have at the moment, and it's always changing, as the virus is always changing, so we just need to be as well-read as possible.
So what was it like with your colleagues, Senator Cabrera? Because one of the saddest parts about the pandemic to me, I mean, there were nice parts about our rediscovering nature and each other and things we value, the sadness of losing people. I hated the fact that Americans were fighting with each other, and that it got political.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think public health used to be political except for like a fringe of the John Birch Society or something. How was it with your colleagues the last 11 weeks? Was it different from the other years?
Yeah, I think this year, I think there was a sense in the building, and Josh could speak to this, where we really understood how serious the work that we do is because of what we have been through and we're going through with this pandemic. We recognize the weight of the responsibility we had to pass good policy, and I think the mental health was one of them, and some of the things Josh talked about as well. I always tell people, shut off cable news for a few days. You'll feel better.
And Facebook, or what the young people use, yeah.
Because you get a sense that, sometimes you get a false picture of we're up there
So
fighting
was there
and trying to kill each
comedy?
other.
Was there you guys were getting along better?
Listen, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of places where we disagree with our colleagues on a whole host of issues.
I don't mean disagreement.
Yeah,
I mean, was it civil, more
Oh, yeah.
civil than usual?
I think
It's almost
absolutely.
always
Yeah.
civil.
Oh, it
I
is
think
good.
that there's this perception that what
Correct.
we see federally filters to the state, and I think to a degree it does with general civil discourse. But when it comes to our relationships in the legislature, I am about as vocal on issues as one can get, and I have excellent relationships with people across the aisle. Because the fact is that you're also not going to get stuff done if you don't have those relationships, because the currency of the legislature is time. And if people really find you abhorrent, not necessarily your ideas, then your ideas are going to die. And if you really believe in your ideas, you need to make sure that you have those relationships. And I think that everybody respects that and respects that as part of the process.
Well, that I'm really glad to hear. And State Senator Jorge Cabrera, State Rep Josh Elliott, both represent Hamden. Sarah Cabrera also represents Bethany, Woodbridge, Beacon Falls, Derby, and Ansonia. Any other top priorities this session that you got done or you couldn't get done?
Yeah, one of the things I'm going to be looking closely at is income inequality. We talked about it.
We talked about how that wasn't
Yeah.
going to happen this time. We got a governor who's a Democrat who's really on the Republican side on that question.
Well, I'm on the Finance and Revenue and Bonding Committee, so I know we've been kicking around. I like to see making the child tax credit that we passed this year permanent. I think is
And
really
that was the
important.
what you passed this year is you expanded it, right?
We had a new child tax credit.
Oh, the child tax credit.
The child
I'm sorry.
tax credit, yeah, it's $250 per child. It's
And that did not exist before, right?
correct. Yeah, that was.
And that's for the year.
Yeah, for Representative Charles Galen has been a huge advocate and leader on this issue, and this is something that we need to pass, especially given the fact that in D.C. The Build Back Better bill legislation is not going to happen. Roosevelt
Right.
was a huge champion of this, and my thing is how can we make some of these things permanent and really have structural tax?
So this
change?
year you passed for 1 year.
I believe it's 1 year. Yeah,
So you'd like to make that permanent
Yes.
next year.
yeah, and I think also we need to say this wasn't a year for, but I think there's an appetite to have a serious debate about the top marginal income tax rate on high earners.
We talk about that every year when you
I
guys
know.
come in at 6.99. Other states they get
Yeah.
over 7,
Yeah.
and it's crazy.
It is.
But Ned Lamont's a Democrat. He's the governor, but he says you're punishing success if people who are at the top are paying income tax rates that are at least half of what a custodian or a cop pays.
One thing that we did get to see this year, which was really exciting for me as somebody who's been advocating this for this ever since I got in, is there's a tax incident study that was done in 2014.
Right, and they deliberately didn't update the numbers to compare
Yeah, and
how
so,
much people pay in state local taxes.
To be clear, the deliberation there was more the fact that you have to find outside consultants, pay them $300,000, and so it was a cost cutting measure as
So what was
opposed to
the new
anything
number we got?
insidious.
So we have a new updated number.
So we have a new updated report that came out this year. I will say it shows us what we expected is that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer.
What did it show about? And is that the cumulative they say what percentage you pay in your local and state taxes or tax state
There
and
is
federal?
a combination of state and local, because when it comes down to it, the progressive income tax is but is the only progressive tax, because the fact is we're still over-reliant on the sales tax, we're still over-reliant on the property tax, and because those are so regressive, it means that the wealthier you are in our state.
So what's the number we came up with? What percentage is a
I
top
don't know off
earner?
the top of my head. I just know it's gotten worse.
'Cause before it was under half. Like the top earners paid less than half as much percentage-wise in taxes.
Oh no,
as-
it's about somewhere between a third to a quarter.
that's amazing.
It's amazing.
So if you're a hedge fund owner, you will if you own the Mets, you will pay a quarter or a third as much percentage-wise in taxes as someone who drives the school bus or goes
Yeah.
That's right.
or teaches in the classroom.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean,
be-
that's sick.
It's because, well, I mean, part of it is that we don't have counties, so we don't have a more equitable property tax structure there. But
I
it's
see.
like
So you could even out what values are
Yep.
based on the tax base.
we're one of the very rare states that doesn't
Well, we
have
got
a
rid of
county
that because
system.
of corruption scandals. Do you think we took the wrong target? Like get rid of the corruption instead of the structure?
Yeah, I mean, you can have corruption in any structure. So yeah, yes.
All right. But now, Josh Elliott, what were your top priorities this term in the legislature?
So I'm the chair of the Higher Education Committee, and so that would normally lead you to believe that all my priorities were higher related. They actually weren't. What I found is that I got about 35 bills through my committee and was mostly working with agencies and individual legislators and mostly technical changes. The really big bill I wanted to get out was this idea of increasing the age of kids under DCF care who could get access to private public education. And so we wanted to change the age from 23 to 30. We dropped it down to 28, dropped it down to 26. turns out we don't have the money for it. Okay, so that's fine. But there were some bills that we did go over the finish line, which I thought were really exciting. We got a bill that ensures that menstrual products are in public spaces. We did a bill that ensures that patients...
Period power. What else did CJ call it? We did a whole show on it. She had a whole bunch of great phrases and memes for that.
Yeah, so that was really exciting. So I was part of the base level building power for that. And then also we passed a bill that allows for patients to get consent before a doctor conducts any sort of intimate pelvic exam while that patient is under anesthesia. And lastly, we continued making progress.
I didn't hear about that one.
Yeah, it was sort of under the radar,
you
which
hear
we
these
needed.
creepy stories about doctors who people in anesthesia and do terrible things. Is that what that's about?
Yeah, somewhat. It really wasn't for bad actors as much as it was for just making sure that doctors got consent. And then the last thing that I've been working on for a while is this idea of medical use of psilocybin. And so I started
That
the
was
task.
a biggie, use mushroom, because that's really
Yeah.
going fast. That and MDM.
Yeah,
like that.
MDMA is in phase 3 trials. Psilocybin's in phase 2
And
trials.
just so our listeners know, that's that you can use magic mushrooms to deal with trauma and
Right.
other psychological cases. That's been a lot of interesting research on that.
migraines, trauma.
So we're doing a study now on that, right?
So we have a task force as of last year. Right now, the language that was in the implementer, and this is the budget bill, essentially works with Yale while they help create a program that allows more access, and then eventually the state will also be doing some of the funding as well.
In other words, for test, right?
What do you mean for tests?
I mean,
This is
what
gonna-
did we approve? I thought it was still going to be trials on psilocybin for...
So this is going to be
trauma.
for therapists to be working with patients.
So will anyone be able to do that, or does it have to be some kind of clinical trial?
No, there's no clinical. The clinical trials are happening at the federal level. This is really just to allow access to patients and therapists.
So it's legal now to be treated?
Well, it's not that it's legal. It's just that we're going to be using federal frameworks to be providing the resources through the state for Yale to be conducting these programs.
So those are studies, right? When Yale does the program?
Yes, Paul. They are studies.
In other words, can Jill or Joe Connecticut say, I have this traumatic incident I'm trying to work through, or addiction, I'd like to use psilocybin? Do they have to sign up for Yale trials
yes,
still?
and it's going to be a very limited program. It's not going to be like anybody anywhere.
This is just a matter of time, though, right?
I believe it's a matter of time, because talking to researchers who are very hesitant to be out talking to vocally, because we saw what happened about 40, 50 years ago when people got ahead of themselves and what that feedback was and the way that it retracted so quickly. I think people are waiting until it's rock solid. And everybody's very excited because
it's been promising, and Michael Pollan's been popularizing
exactly. And so we have people that are taken very seriously, are respected, and are out there being very public that we need better responses to trauma.
Okay, and
this
then
is one of them.
Connect Clean Air Act passed, because last session had been a little bit disappointment for environmentalists when they didn't get that regional compact, right, to cut carbon emissions. But this time you did get a bill over the finish line, right? You're going to have upping the timetable for getting the bus fleet, school, and general population to be electric. You're helping people buy e-bikes.
Mm-hmm.
You got a 2040 zero carbon target for all electricity supplied to Connecticut, and you're going to help small businesses and low to moderate income get solar energy. Is that something that was on your two radar?
Yeah. I mean, Senator Christine Cohen on the Senate side has been a big champion of this. I know Will Haskell has as well.
Let's get closer, George.
So we, always been supportive of the initiatives that they push forward, especially when it comes to the environment.
Then aid in dying did not happen, right?
No.
Frustratingly, also one of my priority bills. That died in judiciary last year. It died in judiciary this year. But we got a little farther this year because we actually got a vote, and it happened procedurally that it died. In that usually the House and the Senate vote on things at the same time. In this case, while we have huge majorities in both the Senate and the House, for whatever reason on judiciary, it's only 5-4. And it makes people question, it's like, why do we have such a bare majority on that committee? Because it ended up happening that it died 5-4 because a Democrat ended up siding with the Republicans and then killing it. And then the House never actually even got a chance to vote on it in the committee. And it was all very procedural.
So
and
it takes
frustrating.
years to get a lot of ideas. Other things like you found out with prison phone calls,
Yeah.
right? And we're talking to State Senator Jorge Cabrera, State Representative Josh Elliott on Dateline Hamden, WNHH 103.5 FM live streamed on NewHavenIndependent.org. Two other biggies. I just don't want to ignore these. is that we took a stand on abortion.
Yeah.
Roe versus Wade is primed to be repealed.
Yes.
It's going to be null and void because Supreme Court.
Mhm.
And this legislature acted. They said
Yeah.
you won't be able to extradite people across from Connecticut if they've been either provided or undertook an abortion across state lines.
You know what's interesting about this too, timing wise, actually we started working on this issue in light of the Texas legislation. This was before we saw what the Supreme Court was going to do when they had their leak. So we had this ready to go when that came out, saying we're already working on this. We're ready for this, and I think that we actually are going to end up being a national model, because what we need to do is just make sure that this is a safe haven for people.
And then also you're going to allowing more providers to do the first trimester suction methods. So that was
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting to me, Senator Blumenthal nationally was one of the co-sponsors of the bill to codify Roe versus Wade. And then his son, Matt, in the legislature took a lead on this.
Yeah.
That was kind of interesting. It's a Blumenthal family enterprise. And then juvenile crime was interesting to me because this was a polarizing issue, right?
It was, yeah.
During the pandemic, there were a lot of kids stealing cars. There was no beating crime. You know, you saw it in Hamden. You've had that with the Plaza. And it was interesting because as soon as the Republicans, they were trying to hot dog the issue, but when they gave specific ideas of what to fix, they were something everyone could agree on, right? So when they say, when you've picked up a young person who might have just like held someone up at gunpoint, we had this in New Haven on Linwood Place. They were released a few hours later, and that you didn't have time to like take care or find out what else they did, get their parents, you know, like they can just go out and do it right again. And and you could have GPS monitoring if they've broken the law a lot, and that you could check their records more to see while they're awaiting a detention order. This was kind of nuts and bolts stuff that it seemed was not ideological. The critique was from Gary Linfield, Ron Porter, that we're doing this instead of or not in addition to dealing more with the root causes of crime, which is one place that you folks definitely disagree. But on the specifics of juvenile crime, am I correct that this was another bipartisan moment?
There was a lot of back and forth on how exactly to do it, and it was, to Senator Winfield's credit and under his leadership, worked hard with the other side to get a piece of legislation that they could all
And the stuff that
on.
passed, you folks are okay with, right, or not? Josh?
I was a no vote on this.
Yeah.
And tell me why you voted no.
It wasn't a perfect bill. Bills aren't perfect. I knew it was going to pass. I wanted to indicate that I didn't love the end result, because I do think that we're still going to end up having too many kids go through the system.
So you would like to see more effort and discussion about what's going to stop the kids from committing the crime in the first place?
Yeah.
Which is something you could agree with, but you voted because you felt like the measure was important in and of itself.
This is a really important issue. Yeah, absolutely. So, Senator Winfield and Josh are 100% correct. We need to do more to tackle the underlying root causes of why our youth get caught up in violence. I did two things this year, specifically in my district, that were, I think, go a way towards addressing this. One is I was able to get some funding for the Hamden Fathers Program, which is a program.
I'm sorry, you got Hamden?
It's called the Hamden Fathers Program. It's a program headed by Dr. Dave Asbury in Hamden, where he deals with at-risk youth, and we were able to get them some funding. Also, Valley Save Our Youth in Ansonia in the Valley, we were able to get money for them, that group as well. They specifically target at-risk youth on the street level, intercede, try to get them into productive things, have funds to take them on trips to get them.
So is it fair to say you both saw an imperfect bill on an important issue?
Yeah.
You both saw specifics that aren't the end of the world or could help.
Yeah.
Josh felt it because he felt it didn't go far enough to stop them from going in the first place. George felt like you were able to get stuff that was really going to help people who are at risk in your district, both in the Valley and Hamden, the kids. So that was worth getting it over the line.
Yeah,
That's the interesting thing about legislating, because there is no right or wrong answer in those situations.
I think Josh hit the nail on the head. There's no piece of legislation that's perfect.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are trade-offs that have to be made and decisions people have to make. But I think he's 100% right, and Senator Winfield talks about this all the time. We need to get serious about funding the programs we know work and we know what works to get our young people at the ground level, at the grassroots level, before crime happens.
So now your district, as we mentioned, is quite diverse.
Yeah.
Senator Cabrera.
Yes, it is.
And it often can go Republican or Democrat. You turned it back to Democrat from Republican. You have an opponent again, but no primary this year. A 17th state Senate district. You are running for re-election, right?
Yep, I am.
And what are you hearing out in the Valley? Because the Valley's different from Hamden's gotten so blue since Josh Elliott moved there. I do think that's why it got blue. And the Valley's gotten redder. It used to be the sort of Republican working class white person who went with the FDR coalition, who then got peeled off by Reagan, if that's a fair way to say it, is now getting pushed into another zone with Trump. Are you seeing that, or am I wrong?
I think things are changing. I think, when I talk to voters in the Valley, the bread and butter issues are what matters most. People just want to make a living. They want their kids to be safe. They want good public schools. They want access to transportation. Those are the things that I stick to and talk about. I don't think that framework is as valid as maybe it was in 2016 and 2018, even 2020. I think
Rosa DeLauro lost Shelton. She lost some places in the Valley.
Yeah.
Well, Shelton's pretty Republican.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, I won Ansonia and Derby in 2020. And
those are more diverse, right?
They are. Yeah.
Big deal.
So the country's changing, and this my district reflects those demographic shifts.
So
as
you
well.
see hope in purple, let's call them purple districts for Democrats. Because, the conventional wisdom is, boy, Democrats are going to get, maybe not in Connecticut, but they're getting wiped out federally, that especially with the redistricting decision in New York yesterday. If that holds, there's they say no chance that Democrats are going to hold the House and Senate.
I think when Democrats are able to communicate the gains that we've made, and we've highlighted some of them here today, whether it's on mental health, whether it's schools, whether it's youth crime, when we talk about the work that we do and do it effectively and communicate to people, we win.
I'm trying to figure that nationally, because you could say pro or anti-Biden. We passed, our Congress passed the largest infrastructure bill in history. They passed the largest aid bill in history. People are going to get bridges or environmental improvements or school funding they never got. Their taxes didn't go up in a pandemic, and they kept their jobs, or they kept their houses. And everyone think he failed. I mean, if you look at it, the numbers are when there's a new jobs report, they're the lowest unemployment in decades. The same day, the polls say that his administration and the Democrats are failing on that policy. So what's that all about?
Look at what we've done in Connecticut, and this is important to highlight. We passed a budget with $600 million of total tax cuts. We provided a child tax credit, we provided a property tax credit, and we made major investments in mental health. We tackled the juvenile crime issue.
We also had a one-time infusion of that federal money.
Oh, yeah. But the point is that, when we are able to talk about the things that we're actually doing to transform people's lives and make them better, we win. We've done the work. Now we've got to make sure that people know the work that we've done.
Mm-hmm. What's your take?
I think that we're battling inflation, which is really out of the hands of both municipal, state, and federal level legislators. I mean, this is just supply chain issues, and that is rippling through our economy, and people are having a harder and harder time affording anything and everything. So even though we have stopgap measures over the next year, I think I echo what we were talking about, Sean Scanlon, the representative who is now on track to become the comptroller. What he said at the very beginning of this session, which I totally agree with, was that we can't have these Band-Aid fixes.
Well, obviously, how when we're a reporter, we get to act like we know better because we don't have to make the tough decisions to, when in fact we know it a lot less than you do. And I do know that. I know a lot less than you do. When I sit outside, I just couldn't believe the 25-cent tax cut. I thought that made no sense. I thought that was saying...
You're talking about the gas tax?
Yeah.
Oh, that was...
I mean, what it does is it lets people maybe save a few dollars that if there's no longer money to keep their daycare center open, they can lose a job and thousands of dollars or have to pay thousands to take care. Yeah. But for a short term, they're going to keep driving a little more. And it just seemed, why were Democrats doing that? Because there was no choice, because you're getting beat up on inflation by Republicans?
Because a very powerful Democrat in office wanted the legislature to do it, and nobody said no.
Yeah, there's always trade-offs, and I think also on the child care issue, this is something we've all heard about, whether it's early childhood or in child care in general. We did $100 million in this budget for that. That's something we hear over and over again. So, we've been able to do some things that I think helps families, and now the real challenge becomes making those things permanent in the subsequent session years. And you're right, we've had an infusion of federal dollars, which has helped immensely, and we did some things.
Which is a good thing.
It is a good thing. We've done something.
There was a pandemic.
We've done some good things. We have done more, of course, but don't forget, we have to work with the governor. We've got to work with the House, with leaders at various levels.
I wasn't criticizing you guys. I was just trying to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, the understanding is that you have to make trade-offs and make investments as well. And don't forget, we've also made record number down payments into our record pension. Over
right,
$3
and
billion.
you did some pension New Haven and Hamden really aren't doing, right? Was using that federal money to try to get more realistic projections so you're not digging yourself deeper in a hole?
Well, that's one big question right now in Hamden is, are we going to start addressing this? And I think the answer is yes, and it's going to be very difficult for people to be able to live there. And this is not a hit on anybody who's there, because I strongly believe that this is what we need. This is the solution, is to address our problems now, because we have 40 years of kicking the can down the road. Now, fortunately, statewide, we started addressing this when Malloy was in office, and I think a large reason why people are so frustrated at Malloy was because he was actually tackling these problems, and it really does come to somebody who's willing to be politically unpopular to address the problems that people have been historically unwilling to address.
Yeah. And so let me pivot a little bit to Hamden about that.
Yeah.
So Hamden, the kind of people who got you guys elected, or that you got elected with your fellow people, were a progressive wing of the Democratic Party in Hamden. And is it fair to say that a generation or two earlier, you sometimes elected Republicans to contested office in Hamden? You had kind of conservative or moderate Democrats as sort of the people who got elected, and that now you have progressive Democrats fully in charge. They won the local elections. You guys are in the legislature. Is that a fair assessment of what's happened in the town?
I think more progressive folk have gotten in, but I don't think that there's any sort of unanimity. And I also think that I think that the folk that you consider left, there's this idea that there's going to tax a whole bunch, spend a whole bunch. But I think
that's not what I meant. I meant you have a new police commission.
Sorry,
and
not you,
Paul.
Not you, Paul. Sorry, the generalized you, because what we're going to be
the progressive
seeing,
Democrats in Hamden municipally were actually running on a fiscal
we ran on a
conservatism
platform of let's clean up the town.
That's a good point.
Of let's make sure that we don't end up under MARB, the Municipal
Democratic
Accounting Review
Socialists were
Board.
saying have lower taxes. Yeah, that was good.
But I mean, what we really need from our town is transparency, which is what we're getting, honesty, which is what we're getting, and a vision for how we're going to get out of this mess, which is what we're getting.
Do you have to raise taxes in the short term so you could pay more realistically in your pension funds?
We should have been raising taxes about 20 years ago, because if we don't now, at some point, the state will come in and just dictate what we can and cannot do. While
would
we
that
still
be
have
bad
options,
if you had MARB?
Of course it would be bad.
And what's the downside? You don't have autonomy to make your own decisions?
You just don't have autonomy to make your own decisions. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was this idea that we can't get above 50 mils. We can't get above 50 mils, that people will leave in droves. The fact is, the longer you wait, the higher it's going to be in the future.
Well,
so,
Josh, isn't there an issue? This gets back to the gas tax, and George. The realities of politics, it's hard to talk long-term to people. The planet might be gone in 20 years, but, you got to right now drill a little more so that you're not paying another 25 cents for that tax.
I don't find it hard. I think some people find it hard.
So you're
I
saying
do not
people
find it
aren't
hard.
dumb, you could talk to them as adults and you can get elected?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's refreshing to people that you can honestly address a problem. You can acknowledge a problem.
There is a tipping point, a magical tipping point on taxes, though, right? If you get to a certain rate, more people will leave.
I don't know. Is there? I mean, we're not talking about raising the rate to 200 mils. We're talking about raising it a few, 3 to 5. And I think that a lot of what my re-election is going to be is actually talking about local levels, even though I have no effect on that, because the amount of money that we get back for ECS funding, that's for the schools, that's all set by statute. And then what we get back in terms of bonding is basically a drop in the bucket. We brought back, I don't know, somewhere between $6 to $8 million for a couple of projects that were really important for Hamden. Really proud of that work. Senator Cabrera was a major part of that. I was a major part of that. Yep. And it does offset a little bit because we have a hard time as a town to be able to bond for that.
So you're saying if you couple that with accountability so that you know if you're going to raise the mill rate, that is going to go toward fixing the pensions?
Yes, it will. Correct.
And I think it's important what we talked about earlier. These are legacy costs, right? Whether that's at the state level, $3.5 billion down payment and pension. These are the tough decisions that I think sometimes we don't realize we have to make, and there's trade-offs to be made. If we have a hole, we're not going to get out of it overnight, and we have to tackle income inequality. We have to tackle the structural inequalities in our tax code that continue to exacerbate these problems.
Mm-hmm. Joshua Elliott, we're on Dateline New Haven, and George Cabrera. Josh, you were one of 49 people running for the Secretary of State nomination.
I think at a certain point it was like 55, 56, and then it willed its way down to about 5.
So from a distance, again, I'm the outsider. I considered you the happy warrior in the race, and let me explain that.
Sure.
You seem to be less worried about whether you're going to get the nomination.
Not worried.
And you seem to be the person who said, I have these couple ideas that I care about so much.
Right.
And I want to go in, throw those ideas out there, and try to win.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And if I don't win, okay.
All good.
I don't win.
All good.
But we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Absolutely right.
So I saw you listed it as 3. I didn't know about the third one. Okay, ranked choice voting. We've done a couple shows on that.
Yep.
kind
of like goo-goo wonks like us love it to death, and maybe we'll find out later that like PAX, it has some, unexpected costs we didn't know.
Countries have been using this for decades
and it's spreading in the
decades.
U.S. and it's working.
Yeah.
And it gets the idea is that you get to vote for someone you want rather than someone you don't want. You're not throwing away the vote, and people have to appeal to a wider range.
Yeah.
You want voting rights for the incarcerated.
I do.
Which builds on your earlier years-long quest with others, including Robin Porter and Gary Winfield, succeeding that they no longer have to pay these incredibly gouging rates to make phone calls. That was sick.
Right.
But you can get that one. Now,
And we're a national model. We're a national model, and now Massachusetts will follow us. California will follow us. We are the leaders on that.
Now,
And
what
I
about
think that's
voting? Tell
very
me about
exciting.
voting for prisoners, and where should they vote? Where they're prisoners or the town they came from?
No, in the town where they came from. I mean, that just lies co-aligns with this idea of prison gerrymandering. Where should resources go? Should they go to the town where somebody's caged, or should they go to the town where somebody is from? And I say it's where they're from because usually it's going to be a disproportionately impacted town in terms of the war on drugs, in terms of disinvestment, a whole number of things. So this is all about fighting for equity and making sure that we have a fair system.
And what's the opt-out system? I don't know what that is.
So the opt-out system is simply this, is that you should, once registered, receive your ballot every cycle without having to ask for it.
Oh, you mean like mail-in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's mail-in, but so it's part of mail-in voting, and they do this in about 7 states. Oregon, Washington, Colorado really pioneered this model. Again, what we had to do the last couple of years is we applied for a ballot, received that ballot, then voted with that ballot. In this system, you don't have to apply for it. You get it year after
Everybody
year.
gets mail-in.
Everybody gets that ballot.
Okay, now, are you supporting any of the candidates left in the race?
Yes, I am supporting both the endorsed candidates. And the reason is I believe that our party needs to come together. I will say Karen is phenomenal. And this is my support for the endorsed candidates is not saying that the other people are not good. The fact is that, and I heard this over and over and over, is that we have an embarrassment of riches in the Democratic Party, at least for this cycle. So many people that were really well suited to all these positions. And I even think that Dita would be great at this position. But when it comes down to it, Eric and Stephanie both have my support because I do want to be unified with the state party to make sure that we get that win in November.
What do you think about that, George? I mean, you had a primary, right? Were you the endorsed candidate last time?
I was.
You were, okay.
Yeah.
Do you think we need conventions anymore? Some people were saying the conventions don't really reflect the popular will. It's not going to help you win the general election.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I like conventions.
You don't have to solve every question, every big philosophical, political question.
No, I don't. I try to stick to the bread and butter issues. Conventions are fun. I totally get it. But, once the party makes a decision on who they're going to endorse, I think that you should go.
Well, some people think primaries are good for a party. For instance, that the Bernie Sanders primaries really
I think primaries are good. I mean, if you look at when I first got elected, I lost my convention in 1903, and part of my argument to the town was basically this. Do you believe that 22 people should be choosing for 24,000?
So then why are you going with the endorsed candidates now?
Oh, because it's the system that we have. I don't think it's the best system, and I don't think that 2,000 people should be choosing for 3.7 million people, the person who should be leading the state. But in this case, because it's the system that we have, and because the process that we have continued to all agree to, while I do advocate that we should have open primaries and we should be using or some sort of version of ranked choice for our primary system or even our system at the convention. I think that there's a lot of changes that we can make, but I think that getting there will be difficult. It's not legislative. It is based on what party bosses want, and there's going to be a level of organization there that just doesn't exist right now. So while the system is what it is, I'm going to play by those rules and simply say that I am with the endorsed candidate.
George Cabrera, you have a day job. You are an organizer of United Commercial and Food Workers.
Yes, sir.
Which successful union. You had a successful strike at Stop and Shop, which was big.
Yeah, it was
during
big.
the pandemic. Labor politics has been interesting. We saw some great revival of interest in grassroots labor organizing, sometimes outside the established unions. The Amazon warehouse where the workers succeeded was not with the established union, where established union failed, and another one. Starbucks has kind of caught some fire, right?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me what you're thinking as someone who's involved in both electoral politics and labor politics. What moment are we at now? What's that going to mean in this area?
I think we're at a historic moment. I think we haven't seen a moment like this in our generation where workers are standing up and have had it and are demanding better wages, better benefits, and respect on the job, flexible work schedules. We try to address some of this in legislature legislatively, but I think what's happening is organically, a big part of it is the pandemic, is that workers are realizing their worth to their employers.
And I would add on to that and just say that you can't rely on people elected to make some of these big fixes.
That's
We
right.
can try to make some of them,
Yep.
and we
No,
certainly
they got to put
rely
the pressure
on
on
labor.
you. You
But we
got to have the organizing.
right, and you have to have the organizing to get stuff done
So
politically.
you got to do what George
but
does. Like
sometimes,
George has to do the work in August so that when George is in his other seat in January, he can pass the law, right?
I think
there's a connection. I think Josh is 100% correct. The grassroots pressure helps us do our job better. But if we don't have that backing, that pressure on us, it makes it harder for us.
So
to do
where
what we
is
have
this
to
going to
do.
go? We saw some in the new economy with the Starbucks workers, one Amazon warehouse. We saw overall people have more freedom to demand for better wages, different job possibilities for now while the market is the way it is. We'll see what happens after the interest rates go up for an extended period of time. We also have a move that hasn't yet worked to think about the gig economy. You guys have been on the side of that issue in the legislature, pushing down some predictability in what your hours are.
Right.
Where's that going to lead, George, in Connecticut?
Well, I think you're seeing this grassroots worker power and energy being demonstrated across the board in lots of places. But I think we have to change the law. So employers have a lot of ways that they can put roadblocks up to when workers organize. I mean, Amazon, for example, they won their election. They still have a long way to go because of all the bureaucratic roadblocks that are up that employers can basically run the clock out. They have endless amount of money and to hire lawyers to just prolong this, which makes it more difficult. So I think it's time for us to take advantage of this energy and this interest and start to change some of these laws so that make it easier for workers to organize. In Canada, for instance, when you get a majority of the units signed up on a card, it's over. The employer is obligated to collectively bargain.
So you'd like to see card check.
Absolutely. Card check would be fantastic. Yeah.
And then finally, Stefanowski running for governor again against Ned Lamont, Republican against Democrat. How are you viewing that race? I'm guessing you're for Lamont, but what do you see in the dynamics? How tough a race? What's going to be the big issue?
it's going to be a very tough race. I think that what Ned has done is what frustrates me is that he said, we're not going to raise taxes. So it does make a big part of his base, which helped get him elected down the Gold Coast, really happy. So he's going to be pulling from the moderates. He's going to be pulling from the Republicans down there who are happy that he's a more moderate voice because, I think the Roe v. Wade stuff is going to filter into this race. And I think that he's seen as someone who's competent.
So some of the stuff that's going to hurt Democrats now, so you think going to help the Democrats in Connecticut?
I think so, yes.
How about you, George?
It's going to be a competitive race, but I think at the end, Governor Lamont will get reelected.
We still got to work.
That's right.
Right.
We do.
I love talking to you guys. Thank you for making the hour to come
Oh,
to
thanks,
Dateline
Paul.
Hamden.
Thanks,
You're
Paul.
always invited. You're always welcome.
Thanks, buddy.
You've been hearing from State Senator George Cabrera, State Rep Josh Elliott, the Happy Warrior, and for Secretary of State and beyond. And thanks to Harry Drost and Nora Grace Flood for working the controls on our many platforms. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven and Hamden's home for community radio.